In May 1957, Lawrence Joseph Bader, a well-known figure in Akron, Ohio, set out for a routine fishing trip on Lake Erie and vanished without a trace. His abandoned boat was found adrift, sparking a desperate search and leaving his family in anguish. Lawrence Joseph Bader, known as Larry, was born on December 2, 1926, in Akron, Ohio, into a well-known family. His father, Dr. Stephen Bader, was a leading dentist in Ohio. Larry grew up in a Catholic household that was both strict and lenient with his 3 siblings. Encouraged by his father to be outgoing and confident, Larry left school in his late teens to join the Navy during World War II. After serving for 2 years, he earned his high school diploma through military studies. He briefly went to the University of Akron, but soon left because he felt that academic life was not for him. During his time at university, he met his future wife, Mary Lou Knapp, whom he married on April 19, 1952. Larry was always carefree and adventurous, constantly searching for quick ways to make money and often juggling multiple tasks. He left university early because he was too busy running a small hamburger stand near campus to keep up with his studies. Later, he and his wife Mary raised 3 children in Akron, Ohio. Larry was recognized as a rugged outdoorsman who liked his privacy, but was also a prominent figure in his community. Larry often wore buckskin when hunting and won a tri-state archery contest. Despite his tough look, he was a family man who liked to socialize, enjoyed beer, and was good at conversation. On May 15, 1957 at noon, Larry loaded a small suitcase and fishing equipment into his Pontiac. His wife, who was pregnant with their 4th child, wanted him to come straight home after work and said, "Maybe I will, maybe I won't." After that, Larry put on his jacket and drove to Cleveland to deal with some bad checks from customers. Once he sorted out those problems and paid off some bills, including his life insurance, he cashed a $400 check. After a busy day of sales and dealing with debts, Larry decided to go fishing and set off for Lake Erie. He eventually reached the Rocky River and stopped at a spot known as Eddie's Boathouse, where the river flows into the lake. Larry took his fishing gear and suitcase from the car and went into the store. There he rented a 14-foot boat and requested to install lights on it. The owner found this odd since Larry had said he would return before dark, but agreed to set up the lights. As the sky was becoming cloudier, the boat rental owner warned Larry that it wasn't a good day for fishing due to storm warnings. Boating on the lake during a storm could be risky during the day and potentially deadly at night. However, Larry was determined to fish. He was sure he could manage, so he confidently paid a $15 deposit from his $400, boarded the boat, started the engine, and set off down the river into the lake. When Larry didn't return by dark, as promised, the worried owner contacted the authorities. The next day, the police and Coast Guard began searching and quickly found Larry's boat 5 miles down the shore on a beach. Surprisingly, the boat was in relatively good condition and still contained all of Larry's gear, 2 life jackets, and one of the 2 oars provided by the owner. The only things missing from the boat were a small suitcase and Larry himself. The police noted that the boat's damage was minor, and there were no signs it had capsized. If Larry had fallen out, or if the boat had overturned, surviving in the rough water would have been nearly impossible. Additionally, the boat's engine fuel line was disconnected, an anomaly that usually does not occur naturally. Despite extensive searches, Larry was not found, and after 2 months it was presumed he had gone overboard and drowned. 3 years after his disappearance in 1960, he was officially declared dead. Between May 18th and 20th in 1957, a man entered the old Round Table Bar in Omaha. The bartender recalled him as a handsome, stocky man with a pencil mustache and a welcoming personality. He wore slacks and a sport jacket, carrying a Navy-issued bag over his shoulder and a small suitcase in one hand. On the other side, he held a bartending guide. The bartender described him as stylish, well-dressed, and financially comfortable. Speaking in a pronounced Boston accent, the man had two questions. First, he asked if there were any job opportunities, and second, he invited the bartender out for dinner. He introduced himself as John Francis Johnson, though he would soon be nicknamed Fritz. The bartender suggested he might find work at Ross's Steakhouse, prompting him to visit there next. At the steakhouse, the owner inquired about his reasons for being in Omaha, to which Fritz replied that he had just left the Navy after 13 years because of a back injury. Now, Fritz was traveling around the country and had recently rented a room at the Farnham Hotel near the bus station in Omaha, where he planned to stay for a bit. He explained to the steakhouse owner that he had gained bartending experience in Navy service bars and showed his Navy driver's license as proof of identity. Fritz was naturally charismatic, and soon after he began working at the steakhouse, customers frequented the place to listen to his stories about a tough and unique childhood in Boston. He told them he was an orphan found on a doorstep and one of 22 children, all named John Johnson. Fritz earned his nickname either at the orphanage, inspired by a character from the 1930s comic strip Cats and Jammer Kids, or in the Navy because his short haircut gave him a German appearance. Fritz told different stories about how he got his nickname depending on when someone asked him. People also enjoyed hearing about his Navy service. He enlisted at 17 and served in both World War II and the Korean War, until a back injury from a submarine attack forced him out of service. Fritz's outgoing and vibrant personality made him a well-known and beloved figure. He was also attracting people with his unique character. One day when guests attended Fritz's frequent champagne parties, they were surprised that his apartment had no furniture, only old pillows and a single fish tank with Siamese fighting fish, which are known for their lethal fights. Known for flirting, Fritz regularly brought young women to his cushion-filled apartment or to his unique hearse, which he called the hunting vehicle. He had equipped the hearse with cushions, a bar, and a Buddha-shaped incense burner. Interestingly, Fritz signed only his first name on documents, seemingly avoiding his last name as if he disliked it. He also dated checks with just the name of the current season, such as spring, summer, or fall, instead of the actual date. This habit was so famous that a bank teller had the specific task of reminding Fritz whenever the seasons changed. Fritz always appeared cheerful, likely because he deliberately ignored any negative news. He avoided watching TV news, reading newspapers, and anything else that could dampen his spirits. The only time Fritz seemed sad was when he was unable to help his friends. He was well known in the community for his charity work, especially when he spent more than 15 days in a box on a 50-foot flagpole to raise money for Omaha's polio drive. During his stunt, Fritz only drank martinis provided by his friends twice a day. When he came down looking thin and bearded, he walked unsteadily to a convertible, joined some glamorous models, and they all participated in a parade to cheers from the crowd. Due to his charisma and flair, Fritz quickly went from being a bartender to a radio station DJ. He began by using the local station, Ken's Equipment, to practice during off-air hours. In 1959, the station recognized his talent and hired him as a DJ, transforming him from a well-known restaurant figure to a local celebrity. In 1961, Fritz moved to television, becoming the sports director and announcer at KETV, a local cable TV station. Despite his previous skepticism about marriage, calling his friends fools for getting married, he married Nancy Zimmer, a 20-year-old photography model, and also adopted her daughter. His friends teased him about his change of heart, but he was genuinely happy. A few years later, in 1964, Fritz was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor behind his left eye, resulting in the loss of the eye. He wore an eye patch for the rest of his life, which only enhanced his distinctive, charismatic appearance. Throughout these challenges, he remained happier than ever. Fritz developed a strong interest in archery, initially taking it up to strengthen his bad back and quickly excelling in the sport. He became the Nebraska archery champion and was later sponsored by Saunders Archery Company to represent them at various sporting goods shows. Even after losing an eye, Fritz was excited about the opportunity to travel and share his passion for archery, earning extra income in the process. In February 1965, he participated in a show at McCormick Place in Chicago, where he demonstrated archery equipment, encouraged new participants, and sold advanced gear to experienced archers. As the morning went on, he noticed a man staring at him strangely, as if he'd seen a ghost. Unsure of the man's intentions, he focused on his work, trying to overlook the uneasy feeling. In the afternoon, the man returned accompanied by a woman. Both looked equally stunned upon seeing Fritz. Fritz figured they might be fans of his archery, too nervous to approach him initially. But then, after a brief hesitation, one of the women stepped forward. She asked, "Excuse me, but aren't you my uncle, Larry Bader, who disappeared 7 years ago?" This unexpected question would forever change the course of his life. 8 years later, a neighbor recognized Larry at a sports convention, but Larry insisted his name was Fritz, and he didn't know anyone named Larry. The man who had been staring at him earlier that morning was actually a neighbor from Larry's hometown in Akron, Ohio. Despite Fritz's black eye patch and thin mustache, the neighbor was convinced he looked exactly like the son of their local dentist, Dr. Bader. However, this seemed impossible because Larry was believed to have died 8 years earlier. The man, struck by the resemblance, quickly found a payphone and called John Bader, the brother of the missing man. John then contacted his cousin Suzanne, who lived close by, to investigate further. As soon as Suzanne saw Fritz, she was surprised that it was him. Despite his eye patch and mustache and the changes in his attitude, she recognized him immediately. She then walked over to him and asked, "Are you Larry?" Right away, Larry acted like it must be some sort of joke. He laughed and denied any knowledge of Suzanne or the neighbor. However, Suzanne was sure of his identity. She suggested Fritz talk to John on the phone, and surprisingly, Fritz was willing to do so. He was confident that a brief conversation would clear up the apparent case of mistaken identity. When John spoke to Fritz, he was certain he recognized the voice as Larry's. Convinced, he and his older brother Rich arranged a private jet to Chicago to confront Fritz. Upon meeting, both brothers were sure they were talking to Larry, but Fritz denied knowing anything about it. He insisted he was not Larry Bader, suggesting that any resemblance or similarity in voice was merely coincidental. Despite the strong physical and vocal similarities, Fritz's personality seemed different. Fritz was a flashy, stylish, local celebrity, quite different from Larry, who was more reserved and enjoyed solitary fishing. However, John and Rich remembered Larry as a younger, more outgoing person similar to Fritz. He suggested verifying Fritz's identity by comparing his fingerprints with Larry's from his naval records. Fritz readily agreed and accompanied them to the police station to confirm his identity. The police took Fritz's fingerprints and sent them to the FBI for analysis, expecting results the next day. While working at the TV station, Fritz received a call from the police informing him that his fingerprints matched Larry's exactly. They explained that he was either Larry Bader or involved in a highly unusual situation. Shocked by the news, Fritz felt a physical reaction, adamant that he was not Larry, but also faced with undeniable evidence to the contrary. He struggled with a sudden identity crisis. Overwhelmed and distressed, Fritz found himself questioning the validity of his own memories and reality, struggling to understand the implications of the fingerprint results. The revelation not only disrupted Fritz's life, but also had a profound impact on others. Mary Lou, Fritz's first wife, was shocked to discover that her husband, whom she believed had died, was actually alive. This news came just as she was moving on and had accepted a proposal from another man. She felt the pain of loss all over again and was overwhelmed with numbness. Being Catholic, she chose not to divorce Larry and ended her engagement. Consequently, Fritz's marriage to his second wife was invalidated. Moreover, Mary Lou faced financial implications as well, since she had been receiving $254 monthly in Social Security benefits after Larry was declared dead. The discovery also brought financial repercussions. Mary Lou had received $39,500 in life insurance and had her mortgage paid off. These entities, including the IRS, were demanding their money back with interest due to the new revelations about Larry. Throughout this turmoil, Fritz tried to face his responsibilities. He began sending part of his salary to Mary Lou, but this became challenging as his personal life fell apart. He lost his job at the TV station, and his relationship with his second wife, Nancy, also deteriorated. Nancy eventually asked him to leave their home. Dealing with these personal challenges, Fritz moved into a YMCA room and returned to bartending. With his modest weekly income of $100, he gave $50 to Mary Lou and $20 to Nancy, while also trying to support children from both of his marriages. In August 1965, Mary Lou and her children visited Larry for 2 days. He was friendly and liked them, but he didn't remember them at all. Mary Lou felt he might even be trying to convince himself that he didn't recognize anyone. She hoped that one day his memories would return or that he would stop suppressing them. Despite their efforts, Fritz only recalled the life he believed he had led, which included growing up in an orphanage, serving in the Navy, and surviving a submarine attack. Meanwhile, other people continued to probe Fritz, asking him about his life before the boating accident to try to jog his memory. On the other hand, many people suspected Fritz, who was previously known as Larry, of being a fraudster and bigamist. Legal charges were considered, but Fritz claimed he had no memory of his former life. To verify this, his lawyer hired psychologists and neurologists to evaluate him for 10 days. They used various methods to assess his memory and found no evidence that Fritz could recall being Larry. They also didn't detect any mental health issues that could explain his memory loss. Consequently, the experts concluded he was not lying. Since he genuinely didn't remember his past actions, the courts determined he could not be charged with a crime. Not long after the legal proceedings, Fritz, previously known as Larry, began suffering from severe stomach pains. He was taken to the hospital, where doctors found that his cancer had spread to his liver. Tragically, he died a few days later, on September 16, 1966, at the age of 39, in Omaha's St. Joseph's Hospital. Even after his death, he was remembered as two people. In Omaha, a memorial service was held for Fritz, and the following day, his body was transported to Akron to be buried as Larry in the Bader family plot. The local Akron newspaper published an obituary that read, "There is no tomorrow for the man who could not remember the past. All that remains is a mystery." His story continues to be a mystery. Fritz's lawyer suggested that his brain tumor was to blame for his memory loss, personality changes, and strange behavior on the day he disappeared. The lawyer argued that the tumor, located in a critical part of his brain, could have caused these issues, and if Fritz's brain was damaged during surgery, it might not recover, preventing him from remembering his past as Larry. Additionally, some people speculated that Larry might have suffered a severe injury on his boat, leading to memory loss. Psychologists back then thought he might have what is now known as dissociative identity disorder, suggesting that Fritz was another personality of Larry that appeared after the boat accident. They speculated that a past traumatic event from his Navy days might have been triggered by the storm on Lake Erie, leading to this change in identity. The emergence of Fritz's personality might have been influenced by a mix of stress at home, financial debt, and dissatisfaction with his life. This explanation aligns with many of the known details. However, people with dissociative identity disorder typically have some awareness of their alternate personalities. Fritz, on the other hand, talked about Larry as if he were a completely different person. He often referred to him as that other fellow and stated, "I am Fritz Johnson, and I had never heard of this batter man until this matter came up." This suggests that when Fritz spoke of Larry, he didn't recognize Larry as another part of himself. In Fritz's view, Larry was completely a different person. However, even assuming a psychological break or injury, there are still unanswered questions like the missing briefcase and the disconnected fuel line on the boat. Perhaps the trauma involved more than just surviving the storm. Maybe someone saw the cash he had and decided to hijack his boat, potentially leaving him for dead. Another theory is that Larry might have been a skilled liar. Psychological assessments weren't as advanced back then. He could have been seeking a way out of his debts and responsibilities, so he might have staged his own death during a stormy night on Lake Erie and started a new life. Whether he left the boat as Larry the liar or Fritz the flamboyant, the truth remains elusive. There's also the question of what happened in the days between the storm and when he showed up at the Round Table Bar. He changed from a missing fisherman to a polished bachelor very quickly, which seems unlikely if he were just a confused survivor, but more plausible if he had planned it. However, this idea doesn't fully explain why Fritz was so helpful later. Why did he willingly take a fingerprint test? Why did he agree to support both families without any resistance? Fritz's actions suggest that he truly did not remember being Larry.
Whatever happened to Tamika happened right there in your apartment.
Yeah, I don't believe that. How you know it's her blood? It could be anybody's blood.
No, it can't be anybody's blood. How long you think we've been doing this? You don't know that we can tell one person's blood from another blood? You ever heard of DNA?
Yep.
Tamika Huston was born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, on December 11, 1979. Tamika was bright and kind, loved adventures, and was very close to her family and friends. After finishing high school, Tamika started working as a waitress. She moved out of her family's house and lived on Harvard Drive in Spartanburg. Tamika loved to sing and aspired to pursue a music career. In 2003, she auditioned for American Idol in Atlanta, but did not make it past the initial round. Realizing the difficulties in pursuing music, she decided to go back to nursing school and embraced her new passion. In the spring of 2004, with school ending and summer approaching, Tamika was excited for a break from nursing school. She often made quick decisions to visit people she cared about. Without classes or a job, she was free to be spontaneous, ready to jump in her car and take off on an adventure at any moment. So, when Tamika neither contacted her family nor arrived home for 2 weeks, her family wasn't too worried at first. But then, her aunt, Rebecca Howard, noticed something odd. Tamika hadn't called her mom back. Feeling something wasn't right, Rebecca contacted the Spartanburg Police Department, starting a search that only raised more questions. When detectives went to Tamika's place, they saw her black 1991 Honda CRX was missing, and her house doors were locked. They checked around and found an unlocked window. The officers called out, but no one answered. Tamika's family in Spartanburg started distributing flyers with her details all over town. They also reached out to local news outlets, hoping to get more attention on her case. Police started interviewing her family and found out about Tamika's ex-boyfriend, Taryn. Tamika and Taryn had just gone through a rough breakup, so the police decided to check his background. He had a criminal history, and there was a previous incident where Tamika accused him of assaulting her. For a law enforcement officer, this would raise numerous red flags, just as it did with Taryn. Interestingly, Taryn had a court date for a domestic violence charge a week after Tamika went missing. Tamika, who had mysteriously vanished, was the one who filed the charge against him. This situation gave the detectives a potential motive. They considered two scenarios. First, Tamika might have left town to avoid testifying against Taryn in court. The second, more troubling possibility was that Taryn might have kidnapped Tamika to prevent her from appearing in court, hoping the charges would be dropped without her testimony. The detectives couldn't dismiss either scenario. They interviewed Taryn, but he said that he had nothing to do with her vanishing. He told the police he felt bad about their fight and was truly worried when he heard she was missing. Even though the police were suspicious after talking to him, they had to release him because there was no actual evidence against Taryn. The police checked hospitals and mortuaries for any unknown women from May to June 2004. They also looked at recent accident reports and emergency calls from the same period. At the same time, Tamika's family kept the public updated on her case. They announced a $50,000 reward for information that could help find her. The detectives got many tips, but most were false. Some tips looked hopeful, but turned out to be cases of mistaken identity, leading nowhere. Despite these challenges, Tamika's family didn't give up, and their efforts soon led to an important clue. In July 2004, a month after Tamika went missing, a woman told the Spartanburg police about a car left in her apartment's parking lot in Barksdale. She recognized the car from a missing person flyer and said it looked like the one parked near her place. Investigators and the forensic team quickly went to the Barksdale apartment complex, just 4 miles from Tamika's home. The car there looked just like Tamika's, and after verifying the license plates, they confirmed it was indeed her car. Now, they had to figure out if Tamika had left it there on her own, or if someone else had put it there. The forensic team examined the car for clues. They found no signs of a struggle. They did find a partial fingerprint on the steering wheel and a set of keys under the front passenger seat. After searching for weeks, this was the first real clue they found that might help them find out more. The fingerprints were entered into the integrated automated fingerprint identification system. Unfortunately, there was no match found in the database. On the other hand, investigators tried using the found keys on Tamika's car and house, but they didn't work for either. They figured if the keys didn't belong to Tamika, they likely belonged to the person involved in her disappearance. A closer look at the keys showed the code AA14 on them. The keys were shown to local locksmiths, and one recognized them. He told the detectives that the keys were for the Fremont School apartment complex in Spartanburg. Investigators found an empty, water-damaged apartment with the keys. They took evidence to be tested, which proved nothing. They also learned from the maintenance worker that the place had been empty for a while, and that doorknobs were changed after evictions to keep former tenants out. The records weren't clear, so he couldn't tell which apartment the doorknob was originally from, but he did give a list of previous tenants to the investigators. Investigators looked at a list of past tenants. Tamika's family didn't know any names, but her best friend recognized one. She remembered Tamika mentioning a guy named Chris she dated after breaking up with Taryn. This was new information for Tamika's family. The friend didn't know his full name, but the list had Christopher Hampton on it. When the researchers checked Christopher's background, they found out that he was 23 years old and had a criminal record. He had robbed a bank in 2000 and served 4 years. Recently, he was in jail for 30 days for a traffic issue because he broke parole rules. But he wasn't in jail when Tamika went missing. When Christopher was interviewed, he admitted to his relationship with Tamika but denied his involvement in her disappearance. His fingerprints did not match the fingerprints found in the car. It had been almost 3 months since Tamika's disappearance, but nothing was found. Suddenly, a woman reached out to the investigators working on Tamika's case. She introduced herself as Christopher Hampton's former wife. She informed the investigators that she was aware Christopher had been dating Tamika when she disappeared, as she had been keeping up with the case through local news. The woman also mentioned she might have some information that could be useful to the investigation. She said she had Christopher's wallet because he sent it to her for safekeeping while he was in jail. She found a red spot on a photo of them with their children in the wallet. She agreed to give the wallet to the police if they came to get it. The detectives went to her house, got the wallet, and tested the photo. The red spot was confirmed to be human blood. Investigators asked Tamika's parents for DNA samples to compare with the blood in the photo. A month later, results showed the blood was Tamika's. They questioned Christopher again, but he denied any involvement with Tamika's disappearance, claiming the blood could be anyone's. Despite the DNA proof, Christopher insisted he was innocent. Investigators thought Christopher hurt Tamika because of the evidence, but they knew it wasn't enough to prove he did something to her in court, especially without finding her. They couldn't tell if she was killed or just hurt and gone missing. Without a body, figuring out what really happened was impossible. Tamika's case stayed open with not much progress until a surprising new clue came up at the end of 2004. A crucial breakthrough in the investigation emerged when a young woman contacted detectives from the Spartanburg Police Department, claiming she had been in a relationship with Christopher in May 2004. She reported having been in his apartment, number 2115, during the period Tamika went missing. She observed several unusual things, including a large reddish-brown stain on the bedroom floor and a dresser pushed against the closet door. Choosing not to confront Christopher about her observations, she stayed the night at his place. Further questioning revealed that she was only 15 years old at the time Tamika vanished and feared what Christopher might do if he found out she had reported him. The investigators decided to keep her information confidential. Investigators got a search warrant for the apartment where Christopher used to live, based on the new tip. They entered the apartment 14 months after Tamika disappeared, knowing new tenants might have changed things. They found signs of a cleanup in the bedroom, including a big bleach spot on the carpet, just like the young woman had described. When they cut into the carpet, forensic investigators found a lot of dried blood. They used a special spray in the bedroom, which showed even more bloodstains, especially in the closet. They quickly tested the blood against Tamika's parents' DNA and found it matched. Telling her family was very hard. They thought Tamika might have been kept in the closet and died from bleeding in the apartment, while Christopher had a young girl over. The large amount of blood convinced them that Tamika was dead. They aimed to find her body to bring peace to her family. On August 12, 2005, Christopher was finally arrested for Tamika's murder. After interviewing, Christopher accepted the crime and told the police where he buried Tamika. He led them to a remote wooded area, 12 miles from the city, and showed them the exact spot of her shallow grave. He had marked it with 2 branches in the shape of a cross. The forensic team dug up the grave and found the skeleton of a woman. The remains were sent to a lab, and the teeth were checked against Tamika's dental records. They matched. Christopher received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Irene Gaza was a vibrant young woman whose life was brutally cut short. Her story is one of beauty, ambition, and dedication to her community. Irene's disappearance and the subsequent investigation drew national attention and left a lasting impact on her hometown of McAllen, Texas. We will explore the intricacies of the investigation, the suspects, and the enduring legacy of this case. We'll delve into the social and cultural context of the time, examining how community dynamics and societal norms influence the investigation. As always, if you have any theories or insights, feel free to share them with us. Your thoughts could help bring new perspectives to this enduring mystery. On April 16, 1960, at around 6:30 in the evening, Irene Gaza got into the family car and went to church. She promised her mother that she would return soon, but Irene never came back. This moment marked the beginning of a tragic mystery that would grip the community of McAllen, Texas, for decades to come. Irene Gaza was born in 1934 to Josephina and Nicholas. She became Miss All Texas Sweetheart in 1958. At the time of her disappearance, Irene was a second-grade teacher to indigent students. She was a devout Catholic and lived with her parents on the north side of McAllen. The school she taught at was on the south side of the city. Irene was a natural beauty and was the first person in her family to attend college and graduate school. In her letters to a friend, Irene described herself as extremely shy and seemed content in her work. On April 16, 1960, Irene drove to Sacred Heart Church, where she planned to go to confession. Because of her striking appearance, several parishioners remembered seeing Irene at the church that night. The church was a significant part of Irene's life, and she was known for her regular attendance. When Irene didn't return, her parents first thought she might have stayed at the church for the midnight mass. But by 3 a.m. they got worried and went to the McAllen police to report Irene missing. The initial hours were filled with hope that she would walk through the door at any moment, but as dawn approached, fear began to set in. On April 18th, passers-by found a single high-heeled shoe on the side of McColl Road. Irene's family confirmed that it was hers. This discovery marked the beginning of a series of grim findings. Later, a fellow teacher spotted a black leather purse lying in the middle of a field, 300 yards north of where Irene's shoe was discovered. No fingerprints were found on the purse, but Irene's driver's license was inside it. Farther north, investigators found Irene's lace veil crumpled in the bushes. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture and heightened the urgency of the search. Authorities and volunteers started the largest search in Rio Grande Valley's history at that time. Skin divers searched the irrigation canals. 2 border patrol planes also searched the area looking for Irene. 65 National Guardsmen also joined the search. Investigators followed up on many leads. A woman claiming to be Irene called Irene's house. She claimed she had been kidnapped and was being held in a hotel in the nearby town of Hidalgo. When the police officers went there to check, it was found that the call was a hoax. Another person boasted to an Edinburgh waitress that he had killed Irene Gaza and that she was next. But it turned out to be a joke. The man admitted that he was very drunk when he made this cruel joke. The community was deeply affected by Irene's disappearance. Vigils were held and prayers were said for her safe return. Irene was loved and admired by many, and her absence left a void that was felt by all who knew her. The outpouring of support and the tireless efforts of volunteers showcased the community's solidarity in the face of such a tragic event. On April 21st, at 7:40 a.m., McAllen police got a call reporting a floating body in the 2nd Street Canal, across from Scars. The area was several miles away from the other evidence. It was confirmed that this was indeed Irene. Post-mortem examination confirmed that Irene Gaza died of suffocation. Any physical evidence that could lead police to the truth was washed away because of the water in the canal. There was a lot of speculation in the local newspapers. The city was in a state of near hysteria. A newspaper in Monterrey, Mexico wrote that a prominent McAllen citizen, Leo de Leon, was the man behind the crime. Leo de Leon had died of a heart attack days after Irene's disappearance. But this whole story was debunked by the police. Many suspected a transient or a frustrated suitor, as Irene was considered extremely beautiful. The most shocking and controversial rumor involved a priest from the Sacred Heart Church. This rumor, which circulated quietly among some members of the community, suggested that a man of the cloth could be involved in such a heinous act. The very idea was almost unthinkable in a deeply religious community where the church was a cornerstone of daily life. This suspicion was largely kept out of the media, as newspapers and journalists were wary of inciting further hysteria and potentially harming the church's reputation. The mere suggestion that a priest could be involved was enough to create deep internal conflict among the faithful, who struggled to reconcile their devotion with the possibility of such a betrayal. The only clue in the case was a muddy shoe print, which was spotted on the bank of the 2nd Street Canal. But because of the rain, police were not able to make out details of the dimensions. The only information that police were able to extract from the print was that it was a men's-sized shoe between 8 and 11. Mayor Philip Bowie announced that the city's police were given a blank check for the cost of the investigation. Detectives questioned about 500 people from several Texas cities. 50 polygraph tests were carried out. A reward of $2,500 was offered for any information relating to the case. Reward money totaling $10,000 was posted by South Texas businessmen. Investigators took statements from Irene's friends, family, ex-boyfriends, co-workers, and anyone who saw Irene on the night of her disappearance. They grilled any man who had taken Irene out on a date. That evening's confession lines were again created to map out who had stood where. But all this was of little to no use. As time passed, the investigation seemed to have come to a standstill from the public's view. But investigators secretly began focusing on John Fite, the 27-year-old priest who heard Irene's last confession. His name kept turning up in the investigation. Fite denied hearing Irene's confession in the rectory during his initial statements, but he later admitted to it. In his initial statements, he said Irene had come to the rectory to discuss a question of conscience that couldn't be disclosed, and that he had sent Irene to the sanctuary to confess. But later, he claimed that he had heard Irene's confession in the rectory, because Irene was afraid that someone could hear them in the sanctuary. Hearing confession in the rectory was considered highly inappropriate by the other priests at the time. It was also reported that Fite's confession line moved slowly that night, and he was away from the sanctuary several times. Father O'Brien had noticed scratches on Fight's hand when they gathered to drink coffee after midnight mass on the night of Irene's disappearance. Suspicion of Fight increased when a woman named Maria America Guerra claimed that 3 weeks before Irene's disappearance, while she was kneeling at the communion rail at the Sacred Heart Church in Edinburgh, a man grabbed her from behind and tried to clamp a rag over her mouth. She screamed, and in the struggle, she bit the attacker's hand. The attacker threw her to the wall, and she ran out of the church. Guerra believed the attacker was a priest. The attacker was wearing black pants, and priests often wore black pants. Local church leaders discouraged people from even considering that a priest was behind all this. By April's end, investigators were able to drain the portion of the canal where the muddy shoe print was discovered. A photo slide viewer was found in the drained part of the canal. Police asked for the public's help to find the photo slide viewer's owner. 2 days later, Father John Fight came forward and confirmed that it was his. In early May, police questioned Father John Fight. He claimed Irene left the rectory between 7:15 and 7:20 that night. He explained that he had broken his glasses that night because he was playing with them nervously as he was listening to confessions. He further explained that he drove to the pastoral house to get another pair of glasses, but he had no key, so he proceeded to climb into the house, which was on the second floor, and that was where he got the scratches on his hand that Father O'Brien had noticed. The next day, detectives questioned Father Fight about the attack on Maria America Guerra. In his sworn statement, he admitted to visiting a priest at that church on that day, but insisted that he left an hour before the alleged attack happened because he had to ring the 5:30 bell at the pastoral house in San Juan. He also explained that his finger got caught in a mimeograph machine the day before the attack on Maria, which was why his fingers had been badly cut. Several priests later confirmed that Father Fight had not returned to San Juan in time to ring the 5:30 bell. They also said his fingers were fine before the night of the attack on Maria. It was also confirmed that Father Fight was wearing the same clothes that Maria described her attacker as wearing. Maria and an eyewitness who claimed to see the attacker fleeing the church picked Father John Fight out of the lineup as the man most resembling the attacker. A polygraph team was brought in to administer the test to Fight. During his test, Fight attempted to control his breathing. The report of the test was prepared by John Reed, possibly the top polygraph examiner in the country at the time. The report implicated Fight in both crimes. It reads, "It is the opinion of the examiner, based on this subject's polygraph, that this subject is purposefully attempting to defeat the recordings." Fight was purposefully taking 10 breaths per minute whenever he was hooked to a polygraph machine. Despite the warnings and instructions given by the test administrator, Fight's normal breathing rate was secretly monitored by the examiners. It was 16-20 times a minute. The report further read, "The examiner pointed out in detail to the subject that he should make an effort to tell the truth concerning his implication in these crimes, so that the church and the priesthood would not suffer when evidence implicating him is turned up at a later date." The subject, in very deliberate and explicit words, stated there will never be any evidence turning up in the future of this case. During the questioning about Maria America Guerra's case, Fight claimed Maria's attacker had confessed to him. The report reads, "The subject was queried as to where the confession was obtained, and told the examiner that it was not in the confessional box, not in the rectory, but out in the open someplace, and was very vague as to where the open place was." Despite this, the test report was useless because polygraph exams weren't admissible in court. In August, the attempted indecent assault case was filed against Fight. After this, Fight became a household name. Fight left the state and was declared a fugitive. He later surrendered. It was believed Fight couldn't get a fair trial in Hidalgo County, which is why his trial was moved to Austin. At the trial's end, the jury deadlocked 9-3 in favor of conviction. In 1962, rather than facing a second trial, Fight entered a plea of no contest to a misdemeanor charge of aggravated assault and paid a $500 fine. No murder charge was filed against Father Fight concerning Irene's death. People wondered if a deal had been struck to avoid embarrassment to the church. Father O'Brien told Irene's family that the church's punishment was greater than any sentence handed down by the court. Father O'Brien assured the family that Father Fight would be sent to a monastery. Fight was sent to Assumption Abbey, a Trappist monastery in Missouri. There, Fight met with Dale Tacheny, who was charged with counseling Fate and determining whether Fate could become a monk. One day, Tasheni asked Fate about the rumors of his past. Tasheni asked, why was he there and not in prison? Fate replied, the church was behind him. After some time, it was clear that Fate did not feel comfortable with the monastic lifestyle. Fate asked to be transferred. Seniors told Tasheni to prepare Fate so that he was no longer a threat to society. Tasheni had some psychology background, having studied the subject. At the time, the Trappist order believed that priests could be healed. Tasheni started by getting to the bottom of the truth. Fate confessed to Tasheni about hurting a young lady and killing another one. Tasheni thought he had to break the impulse that led Fate to commit these violent actions. Tasheni questioned Fate about the things that led Fate to perform such actions. Fate admitted it was the click of women's heels that bugged him. Fate also admitted that sometimes he felt the urge to attack women from behind, particularly when women were kneeling. After this, Tasheni began Fate's therapy. Once Fate felt he could control his urge, he was sent on a mission. He was sent to several churches to see if he could control himself while standing behind women. Fate returned and reported he was successful in the mission. After this, Tasheni believed Fate could be sent back into the world. Fate was then sent to a treatment retreat for troubled priests in Jemez Springs, New Mexico, which was run by the servants of the Paraclete Order. Fate joined there as a staff member, but rose to the position of superior. While there, Fate sent priests who were dangerous to society back into communities across the country. While working there, Fate fell in love with a light-skinned young Hispanic woman. In 1971, Fate left the priesthood and got married to her. In December of 1971, Father O'Brien wrote the following letter to the McAllen police. Dear Chief, I have just received notice that John Fate has left Denham Springs, New Mexico, and is now living in the Chicago area. He is seeking employment as a layman and will no longer function as a priest. This was his own decision and was not due to a problem. If any further information is needed, please feel free to call upon me. Father Joseph O'Brien, OME. Fate had 3 children and worked at the Society of St. Vincent de Paul as a food volunteer for 17 years. It seemed as if everyone had forgotten about Irene and moved on. But this was not the case. After Tasheni left the priesthood, he started feeling guilty. Finally, in 2002, while living in Oklahoma City, on a warm April afternoon, Tasheni called the San Antonio Police Department. He believed the crime about which Fate confessed had taken place in San Antonio, as Fate had spent time there while training. Tasheni was not aware of the place or time of the crime. Tasheni assumed the year of the crime was 1963, as Fate had come to Assumption Abbey in 1963. Detective George Sadler, who picked up his call, couldn't remember any case that resembled the details that Tasheni was telling. So, he asked Tasheni to put everything he knew in writing. Tasheni wrote a 2-page letter describing what he knew in detail. Detective George Sadler searched through records of old cases that took place in San Antonio, but no case seemed to resemble the details mentioned in the letter. The detective set aside the case as he failed to find anything in the records. Late in 2002, Texas Ranger Rocky Millen visited Sadler's office for some work. During the casual conversation, he mentioned details about Irene's case. He pointed out how they were working on cases as old as 40 years. George Sadler immediately picked up on the details and pressed Millen for further information. Sadler learned that the detective working on the case was Texas Ranger Rudy Jaramillo. Sadler met with Jaramillo and the two exchanged their notes. In November, Tasheni drove to San Antonio and sat with Detective Jaramillo. He shared everything he knew, and Jaramillo got all of that on tape. Tasheni wept after they finished recording. In 2003, police requested Dale Tasheni to call Fate, and the call was recorded.
Hello?
Hello, John.
Yes.
This is Dale Tasheni.
Dale. Long time no hear. Still at the monastery in Ava?
No, I left the monastery at Ava in 1965.
All right, how may I help you, dear?
What I need to somehow clear my conscience of what has happened in the past.
I've been, well, for about 40 years now, covering up and holding within me something that I've known about and could never talk about. And yet I feel I too, like you, have injured some people by my behavior. The things that we discussed while you were at the monastery are not quite the same, it appears to me, as a newspaper article that I had read more recently. The young girl's tragic demise.
Are you referring to the Irene Gaza murder in the Rio Grande Valley?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, that has been in the newspapers recently.
Yeah, and what I've read doesn't coincide with what you told me about that. And there are relatives that are living, and I would really appreciate, or helpful to me at least, if you'd come with me to those relatives.
Come with you to those relatives?
Yeah, and explain to them that, we've been responsible. You've been responsible on your end for the accident or unfortunate thing that happened. I covered up along with you all these years.
And I am telling you this evening that I am not the man who killed Irene Gaza. And I certainly don't intend to instruct you, but I can only say that you're going to have to go with your conscience on this and do what your conscience tells you is right, because that's exactly what I'm doing.
Oh, well, I guess I'm very confused then now. More so than I was before, because you told me that you did in fact participate in the death of a young woman.
Well, I can only repeat myself and say I am not the man who killed Irene Gaza. And that is the story that's circulating in the newspapers at this time.
Was it somebody else then that you told me about?
At the time I was in the monastery, I was pretty much a broken man. Psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. I have no recollection what I may have told you at that time. And it grieves me that it's causing you pain at this point in your life. I will pray for you.
What?
This cloud and this cross might be lifted from your mind and heart.
Rudy Jaramillo was also able to find another witness, Father Joseph O'Brien. Father O'Brien told detectives that he suspected Fate from the beginning. He was so suspicious of Fate that, together with another priest, he searched the attic and the basement of the Sacred Heart a day after Irene went missing. He also followed Fate later that day, but lost him. Despite this, the detective felt as if O'Brien was not giving full information. During the last round of questions, they were able to break O'Brien. He admitted that when he had confronted Fate and asked whether he killed Irene, Fate confessed everything to him. Now, this case had two witnesses, Taccini and O'Brien, both ready to tell the truth in court. In the spring of 2004, the investigators presented the case to the district attorney's office. Rene Guerra served as district attorney in Hidalgo County at the time. When in 2002, Guerra was asked about Irene's case, he reportedly replied, "Why would anyone be haunted by her death? She died. Her killer got away." His comment didn't sit well with Irene's living family, first cousins, aunts, and uncles. Irene's parents died in the 1990s. Guerra's reason for not revisiting the case was that the early police investigation was badly done, and that while being questioned, O'Brien was suffering from dementia. Guerra also believed detectives had inappropriately fed Taccini the location of the crime. There was no physical evidence in the case, according to DA Guerra. When questioned why Guerra was not pursuing the charges in the case, he told the local media that without DNA or a confession from Fight, he didn't have enough evidence to present this very old case in front of a jury. This started a war of words between Guerra and McAllen Police Chief Victor Rodriguez, who had decided to reopen the investigation of Irene's case in 2002. Guerra started receiving criticism. Guerra was also part of a powerful Catholic family. Finally, in March of 2004, after months of negative press, Guerra agreed, and prosecutors presented the evidence of the case to a grand jury. Only one witness was called, a secretary from Sacred Heart Church in McAllen, who was also a defense witness for Feet in his other trial in 1961. O'Brien and Tacheny were not called. Jurors were presented with transcripts of Tacheny and O. Bryan's testimonies. John Feet was also not called. The jurors voted not to indict Feet. After this, Tacheny went to McAllen to apologize to Irene's family. O'Brien died in 2005, and the case was again dead until 2014. In 2014, Irene's case was again in the spotlight when District Court Judge Ricardo Rodriguez campaigned against Guerra for the district attorney seat in the Democratic primary. The Irene case arose as a campaign issue. Rodriguez promised if he got elected, he would review the case. He won and was now the new district attorney. In April 2015, Rodriguez announced that the case was again being investigated. In February 2016, 83-year-old Fight was arrested in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was charged with Irene's death. By now, Fight walked with the help of a walker. He entered a plea of not guilty. The defense team asked for a $100,000 bond, and a $750,000 bond was requested by the prosecution team, but Judge Louis Singletary set a $1 million bond. After some delay, Fate's trial started in 2017. During Fate's trial, evidence was presented by the prosecutor that suggested a deal was struck between the district attorney and church leaders so that the image of the church could be protected. A letter from August of 1960 was presented. It was sent between clergy officials. It expressed concerns about how Kennedy's presidential campaign and the re-election chances of the local Catholic sheriff would suffer if a priest was charged in Irene's death. A former reporter, Darrell Davis, testified about an off-the-record meeting between him and the district attorney in 1962. Tacheny also testified. Irene's childhood friend, Anna Maria Holling-Swarth, also testified about a time in 1960 when Garza spoke to her about Fight. Two other women, Beatrice Garcia and Cleotilde Tilly Sanchez, testified about Fight's strange behavior around them in the 1960s. In the closing argument, the defense lawyers asked jurors to consider the lack of actual evidence in the case. On December 7th, jurors decided Fight was guilty. A sentence of 57 years was asked by the prosecutor. 57 years was the amount of time that had passed since Irene's disappearance. On December 8, 2017, the jury sentenced John Fight to life. On February 12, 2020, Fight died of natural causes while serving a life sentence at a Texas prison. If you found this interesting, you can watch more videos on our channel. As always, thanks for watching.